Hi, this is Mike making my video. It's 5/1/2025 and it's 6:45 a.m. Uh, basically I'm talking about the two minds, the two worlds, heaven and earth, and everything in between. So, basically, uh, we have two states of being, the physical and the spiritual. And another way of saying the spiritual and the physical is a manifestation of the human mind. And basically happiness and what that entails. So pursuing happiness is kind of a hard goal. But you take away from a man's desires and you add to his wealth. Uh, that's pretty much what my life's been. Fulfilling desires, having things, and basically getting to the point where I have completed things, and that it says strive to be complete. Make the two into one. Strive to be complete, and it's more or less called the great work, and evidence thereof, of being complete is when you collapse a wave function and you experience miracles when the windows of heaven open up and they pour down a blessing so big you can't contain it. Your cup overfloweth. Your mind overfloweth, and you basically experience something that is profound. And that's really ultimately the goal in life. Is there's two goals. One is to have completion and become complete. In other words, perfect. And perfect in mind and perfect in body. Lift weights and stuff like that. And of course, have a mind that is complete, perfect. And, when you've done that, you have epiphanies and things that happen that pretty much indicate that you've completed something. And that's what life is basically a series of tests. And, when you pass a test, you basically get rewarded. And it's like you're playing a video game and we're all connected with these headsets and earphones and stuff like that. And we are connected to each other through entanglement and more or less the von Neumann chain and stuff like that. And basically, we perceive each other's thoughts and stuff like that. And we, we carry or we pick up on knowledge. Knowledge is not necessarily something that comes just from you primarily. It comes from all kinds of sources. Wisdom does. But when you pass a test, a major test, you'll have a major boil off point, when you complete something, a task. And usually when you do, and you do it successfully, you have a manifestation, a pearl of wisdom, and you get these pearls of wisdom. And when you do that, you experience something so profound that you can't wrap your mind around it. It's something that's almost too big to comprehend. In today's day and age, with that being said, it's easier to do that, to comprehend. But, ultimately everything is a powerful delusion. It says the heart is the most deceitful above all things, meaning the heart was considered the mind, the emotional mind. But you got the intellectual mind, of course, and you got the reptilian brain that's attached to your body. So, you got your DOS operating system and Windows above that, more or less. And you have your CPU. And it's a dual core, you basically have the right and left hemisphere. So there's that, and then it's a quantum computer. It's more or less analog, and it runs only on like 15 watts. And your eyes, basically are 120 megapixels. So there's that. But we're basically we're playing a game, and we have the shared reality. It's an agreed reality, and we're playing it, and there's a lot of NPC actors that are outside of you, and you're the main center character of the game. But to somebody else playing the same game, they might be the same center actor of the game. But needless to say, regardless, you're the main character in the game when you're playing it on your behalf. So anyway, to add to your wealth is to take away from all your desires. And slowly but surely throughout life, once the wave function gets collapsed and you have these fitness rewards and stuff like that, and things that happen, say you're hungry and you get something to eat, you no longer have the desire for food. Let's say you have a high sex drive and you complete the sexual act and with a woman or something, and then you no longer have that desire to be with women after a while. You've had enough sex. It's like too much chocolate pudding, and you just say no. And there's that. And then sometimes you have a lot of money, and you get to the point you say, well, money's really not that important. You'd rather have manifestations, miracles, and stuff like that. And so you exchange one set of things for another, one estate for another. You put on the new garment, you shake off the old self. You destroy the king, and that's basically the ego mind. And when the ego mind, causes all the pain and suffering with attachments, and with all these attachments, with all these things that you're looking for, once those things have been fulfilled, then what happens is you no longer have those desires, and you no longer have the desire for a manifestation that's already taken place, and then you no longer need it, and then you just move on to the next thing. It's like lightning striking twice. It rarely happens. I'm not saying it can't happen, but having that purple paisley coat, sometimes you get it, and you've had it, and let's say you lose it or whatever, you don't really desire it again. It could be a model of a car that you have or had, and you don't necessarily desire it anymore. So a lot of times, as you get older, the things that you desire are less expensive, and you get to the point where you pine things down, and you no longer have that same desire for the same women, and you no longer have that desire for the same bits of knowledge because you've already understood things. And of course, with a lot of merchandise, you don't have the same desire for some of the same merchandise. So so that's what you do, is you simplify things. You cut off all the fat, the dead weight, all the dross. You burn it off, and you shake off all the subtle from the gross, and you basically the gross things you cut off, and then the subtle things you keep, or vice versa. But then you're basically taking all those canes off, and then you're pruning the vineyard, and it produces more grapes, more better thoughts and stuff like that. And then of course, if it gets used, then it gets added to. But if it's something you don't use, you lose it, and that could be with anything. So it's just a simpler thing to do, is to basically live a simpler life. And there's that, and then there's you know, we all share from the same inheritance. There's more or less the universe basically, or let's say Mother Earth, and you have your mother and you have your father, but Father Time, Mother Earth, or whatever. But then you have it to where we all get things from that same source, the well. And that well, could be something that's coming from you, which it is. Ultimately, it's a cistern. And you build a cistern for yourself, and you don't share it with a bunch of people. And likewise, you might find a well, you take what you need, there's always water in it. And that source energy, that source, that quantum field, you basically draw from that. So your desires, if they're strong enough, and your vibrations are high enough, and your beliefs are there, where you don't have blockages. And of course, when you fold, instead of focusing all the time, you focus, but then you fold. And then you submit. And then when you submit, you basically open yourself up to greater rewards. And of course, you have to have determination. And like I said, sacrifice. And then you basically have to have gratitude and be thankful for things, being content with what you do have. And you're content with what you do have, and then that opens the door for you having more eventually. So then, your hobbies are less expensive. You don't smoke cigarettes that are in a box. You smoke them out of a bag. You eat food out of a can, food shelf food. You become frugal. And that's what they mean by, there's a wise fisherman, and then of course like a frugal farmer. And when you're frugal and stuff like that, you basically take all the things that you do have and you trade them in for something greater. That's like he had his farm and whatnot, let's say the vineyard and this and that, but then he traded everything in for a fine pearl. That could be a woman's body, but it could actually be a treasure buried in the fields. It could be the pineal gland. It could be a number of things, but so anyway, you could have a large family, a lot of money, a lot of friends, a lot of knowledge, a lot of spiritual knowledge, a lot of magical abilities, like I said, a lot of money, a lot of property. And you could have all kinds of things like that, but sometimes, any number of things like that you let go of. And as soon as you let go of things, what happens is you're in a state of lack. When you're in a state of lack, let's say your bank account's empty, it eventually gets filled. Your stomach is empty, you eventually get it filled. Your mind, there's emptiness in it, and it gets filled with new wine. So a state of lack is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes, because of that, you get greater things. And of course, that's really how that works. So, and you, like I say, you exchange one set of circumstances for another, one set of problems for another, and one set of blessings for another, and you get eventually to the point where you're content, and that's actually a state of being that's actually kind of like a low level of happiness, and it's consistent for the most part. It's pretty easy to achieve. It's not so much euphoria. Euphoria is something that comes and goes, and it's temporary, it's fleeting. You go back to, like a hedonistic treadmill, you get something, and then what happens after a while, you lose interest in it, and it goes back, you go back down to the base state, the default mode, and that's really how that works. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Over and out.